going to talk about forgiveness, and in particular we're going to talk about forgiving people that have probably very dramatically wronged you. What I called in the title of the talk, really difficult people. We're not going to try to forgive Adolf Hitler or something like that. That's sort of a whole other scale that I think the principles still apply, but what I have found is that when people start to go to that place, it's like, well, they pick the most extreme example and therefore it kind of negates the work that we could possibly do in our lives. So let's not worry too much about that. The reason I feel qualified to talk about this is twofold. Number one is I had some very bad molestation in my childhood from my parents, so I had to overcome that. So I've been through a very rigorous and lengthy forgiveness process. And the other thing is that I'm a priest of Christian mysticism, and I have counseled people through the process, some less extreme to the degree that they were wronged, and some of equal extremity. And we're going to talk about it today. If you are somebody who feels there's something inside of you that you have not been able to forgive, somebody who wronged you pretty severely, I hope that today's chat kind of gives you the inspiration to want to begin a process, because the mystical path is all about experience. So talking about it and understanding some concepts may soften some of the anger if that's something that you are carrying. It may help you understand the situation better. But I think unless you actually go through the full experience and come to the other end and realize that what was once very charged inside of you has now been neutralized, then you will know that this is reality. And really, when you get to the end of that, it does feel somewhat miraculous, because a lot of us are carrying some pretty deep anger from a long time ago. And we're fine as long as we don't enter into discussing it or remembering it or thinking too much about the person or hearing people speak positively about the person or whatever. We can be okay for long periods of time. But there's also something in the soul that will often be nudging us, going like, I know this is not totally resolved. I know that on some level I'm kind of ignoring it or I'm suppressing it. So it's up to you whenever you want to start the process. And starting the process can be very disruptive. So, and what's really interesting is that it's not the same process for everybody. We are essentially looking for several things. Number one is the emotion that is trapped as a result of what we went through has to be acknowledged. Some of it has to be expressed. And one of the most sort of miraculous and brilliant parts is that it needs to be witnessed. It needs to be witnessed by somebody who you feel cares about you. And this is where I feel that to some degree, traditional or modern or clinical therapy, there's an element to that which I think is a function of kind of an insurance-driven society. And I don't mean like paying your insurance bills. I mean the paranoia that somebody's going to sue me, I'm going to cross a line, my responsibility is, whatever. Because I've been to several therapists, and there is an energy of, therapists maintaining a certain boundary. Of course, there has to be a boundary because, people will have strong feelings. But what I have found is that it's the love from the person observing to the person suffering. And that love has to be felt to a certain degree. That if I'm going to walk somebody through a forgiveness process, if they feel that I am just taking them through a clinical process and I'm maintaining a certain, sort of a wall here because I have to for professional purposes, the soul is smarter than that. The soul is healed by love. Now, okay, so that's difficult because we know this concept of transference. Well, what happens if the person starts to have strong feelings? I mean, the human race is not perfect, right? I mean, first of all, we shouldn't be violating each other in the first place. So we have a need for a process. We have a need to bring love, and there's going to be some messiness in the process. I haven't found that to be completely avoidable. But I have found that if the person feels deeply cared for and loved, and so the person is listened to, and the experiences that they went to, the degree to which they were wronged is validated, and the person really sees that somebody else sees it, that is a huge step in the process. Now, people can do this for themselves. However, I think it would be helpful to go through a process led by a facilitator and then somebody help you understand the various parts of yourselves that need to interact. For example, if I wanted, let's say I wasn't able to, or I've been through enough of these forgiveness processes by walking people through them, etc., to go, I see the parts. I can validate the emotion for myself if I've been through it enough times and I realize, and these parts of myself are known to me. But most people, in the beginning, we need to be taken through the process and then taught how do these various parts express to each other. So what I mean is we often have a very wounded part, the part that was afflicted by whoever hurt us. Now in my case, I don't want to talk extensively about my situation, but just to give you a little bit of foundation, is that, right from a very young age, possibly infantile, I had people in my family that were taking advantage sexually. Were not able to manage their sexual appetite, were unfulfilled in their relationship. One was lacking the emotional connection, the other had a sexual appetite that was not being satisfied, and so, they made choices that I happened to be right in the middle of it. That part of me that was afflicted became wounded. It was like my sexuality never got a chance to express itself in its natural timing. And that kind of thing stays with you all your life. To a certain degree, you're never going to be as if that didn't happen. And so there's a lot of suffering that happens as a result, because, it affected my relationships with women, my perspective of women, my perspective of men, am I homosexual, am I this, am I that? I mean, it's very confusing, and there's a lot of lost opportunity as a result. So every time one of those situations comes up, there's sort of another wave of the anger and the violation. And this is the wounded part that is still very much, the wound is still alive. It has not been healed. So that's the part in us that needs to be heard, needs to be received, needs to be validated. The part that is able to validate, which oftentimes a priest or a therapist will play, is another caring human being who loves and who recognizes to what the extent the person suffered and is able to validate that, to see it and to acknowledge. We are looking for points of release. We're looking for, and I've seen this happen, and it happened for me, when sort of all of a sudden just the floodgates leave, and it's not the anger that comes out, it's the deep sadness, it's the hurt. And I have seen people wail, the kind of crying that's not just like a tear here and there and like I'm holding it back, it's like convulsions, waves of hurt. If you have an open heart and you watch somebody go through that, it's devastating. It's beautiful because it's a release, but to see the degree to which a human being has suffered, and there's no filter. It's not about the anger anymore, it's just the deep anguish. And when one can reach a point where that anguish can release, and the person can just sit there in a room and just like bawl their eyes out and just convulse, and it comes in waves, and it's just really intense. And it's beautiful in the sense that this is the seed of the real transformation. Getting to that place where the individual is able to, where the person is able to let that out, takes time, because the anger that most people, when they talk about the way that they've been violated, the anger is a type of protective layer over the hurt. Being angry is a sort of an expression of like, well, nobody's going to F with me, and this guy's such an a-hole, or this person was so dishonest and so deceitful, and so that's all a very protective thing, and that we have to acknowledge that. We can't negate that. We can't rush to forgiveness. Something that a lot of therapies subscribe is this focus on it's not your fault and all that, and I think that's true. It's just that I haven't found that necessarily that gets us to the point where the anguish is able to fall out, kind of thing. It really is the love of the person leading the other person, the deep care and the feeling that I really see you, I really care about you, I want this to be finished for you. And the other person finally sort of decides to trust that. So the anger sort of gives way to the realization that in most cases we were wounded, we were transgressed by somebody who was supposed to love us, who said they would love us. I mean, if it's, if it's a parent, they had an obligation, they had a responsibility, and they violated in some way because they're human beings and because they weren't able to manage their anger, or in a lot of cases, they were incredibly abused and wounded themselves, and so they just perpetuated what they were taught. I mean, it's not justification for it. I still think it's all wrong. However, it helps us a little bit to understand why somebody made those choices. And most of the times, it isn't actually malicious. There are some of the times where it is malicious. I think a lot of it is people are not able to manage or control their emotions, their appetites, their frustrations, their temper. Other times people are opportunistic, like when it comes to, let's say, a relative sexually exploiting a child, whether it's a boy or a girl. They do not have a handle on their sexual appetite. The sexual energy is really intense. And so they start to get very creative and crafty in figuring out how they can get what they want. And so, of course, a child is often an easier victim. And they are able to disconnect in that moment from how that violation is affecting that other person, permanently. Like I said, you can get back to a place where you realize it happened, you're healed, but you're never as though it didn't happen. And that's difficult. So we want to create an environment, whether it's inside of ourselves, if we're relatively connected within, we create an environment of love within ourselves, and we're seeking to reach that place where that anguish and that hurt can flow out, can really come out. I still think it's a lot better if somebody can witness it. Another person seeing it who cares is hugely healing. Now, when that part has released, that is a tremendous reduction of pressure, because that stored emotion, now that it has had, and it may take a few sessions, and a lot of it may come out in one, and the person goes home and they're kind of exhausted and spent, and they feel like, okay, some progress has been made. Wow, I didn't realize all of that was in me. And there's a sense of kind of exhaustion, but relief. But we are not finished. First of all, there may be another wave of that. And what ultimately we're going to get to is understanding what happened. And there's many branches to whether or not the soul decides that they are going to forgive. Now what we have seen, let's say we've accomplished this process of reaching the hurt, and the hurt is poured out, and we've cried and we've wailed, and somebody witnessed it, and we feel seen. Okay. But the soul still has the opportunity to maintain this very fixed idea of how wrong they were and how unfair it was and how much they would like the other person to suffer as a result of how much the suffering it's caused them. And that means that there's going to be a sort of a tightness. In the Bible, Jesus talks about if you do not let go of your anger, if you do not resolve your anger with somebody, it's as though you're in a prison, and you will be in that prison until you pay the very last penny. I'm not exactly sure how to interpret, paying the last penny, except we are striving to do a forgiveness process, not to let somebody off the hook, but to liberate ourselves permanently. And so it requires a different perspective on humanity. And also, the exploration into what does it mean to be compassionate, how does karma play into this, and what does it truly mean to forgive another person. What it doesn't mean is to accept that what they did was okay. It does not mean you have to maintain a friendly relationship with a person. It essentially means, the root of the word forgiveness is a type of complete forgiving, or you could say it's you're giving in advance. What you're actually doing is relinquishing the right to want to see that person suffer or paid back as a result of what they did to you. It's a surrendering of the individual to God, and recognizing that in God's system, nobody escapes anything. We have the opportunity to be remorseful for our actions that wronged others, and by the mission of Christ, we are able to be forgiven for that process. And that's ideally what happens to anybody who transgresses somebody else, that they actually reach a place of recognizing the extent to which they wronged somebody else, have a sense of the deep anguish it caused them, feel a visceral remorse for it, and turn to God and ask for forgiveness. And just acknowledge that as a human being they made an error and they feel horrible about it, and please, Lord, lift the burden from my soul. And if the person does not, which is very common in certainly in situations when it comes to sexual violation, because it's such a heinous act that nobody wants to acknowledge it, nobody wants to admit it. And if they do, it's always like, yeah, and let's move on. There's no ample time given to it, and I understand why, because how do you sit there and go, yes, I was a grown man and I had sex with my 2-year-old because I couldn't control myself. I mean, I understand that. How do you face any human being? It's just a horrible kind of concept. But that was their reality. So you have a lot of people who do these kind of things that they have a justification for it. They blocked it out of their memory. They're not prepared to own it in any way. And unfortunately, this is my experience on the Christian mystical path, or just on the mystical path, that if there isn't the realization and the embodiment of the remorse for it, and possibly the taking action, this is why I think confession is a really valuable process in the in the spiritual path. When I see confession on movies, people sitting in a box with a screen, and the priest always looks somewhat bored and kind of irritated, and it's just like, well, go do your Hail Marys. I mean, maybe the movies are presenting it in a skewed way. I can imagine there are priests who actually care. But the act of confession is really vital in terms of, again, another person recognizing and witnessing what you have come to bring and your true remorse. And them seeing it and their love for you helps you to truly release it and receive the forgiveness of God for what you have done. I mean, whether you end up having to pray Hail Marys, or that says, well, you should do some service work, or who knows what. I do feel that through the labors that we take on, that is part of our redemption process. But let's say that the person does not have remorse, will not relinquish, thinks they didn't do anything wrong, or in fact they thought that what they did was helpful. You have some parents or teachers that were really severe and abusive to their kids, going, well, I had to toughen them up, or it was too much of a sissy, or she was too promiscuous, so I had to teach her a lesson. I mean, that is a condition that the human being is entitled to. They can make that choice to hold fast to that what they did was actually helpful or right. Now, I mean, so then we go, why should I forgive somebody like that? Well, again, the process of forgiveness is so that you're liberated. It's not so much a focus on the other person. Now, when somebody makes a choice to go, no, like what I did was right, and you're just too sensitive, or you toughen it up, or suck it up, or whatever. See, they're going to be subjected to the law of karma, and so some experience that energetically replicates what they did at some point will come back upon them, that they may experience what it feels like to be treated that way. And when you truly forgive somebody, you do not want that to happen, but you realize that it could happen. In other words, against somebody who sexually molested me, I don't secretly hope that they go through that and suffer. I would rather the person realizes what they did and is forgiven for it. And then the whole humanity is that much better, just a little tiny inkling better, because we have one less molester in the system, as you could say. Because of the process, I don't hold the desire for that person to suffer anymore. And that's because it is possible for a human being to go through this process, to have the validation of the emotions and the suffering and the hurt, and then their understanding to shift as a result of discussions, counseling, prayer, meditation, to reach a point where it's not helpful to want somebody else to suffer. It's hard on all of humanity. But we can't rush to that phase. We can't intellectually forgive and decide, like, yes, I'm there. I mean, you'll know when it's neutral. There's no more charge inside. It's like the difference between when you have a wound and you push on it, it's still a little tender, compared to when you have a scar and you can push on it all day and there's no more sensitivity. And it is possible to get to that point. Now, sometimes following the hurt and the anger sort of phase, when somebody is expressing all of this to somebody that truly cares and loves them, and not in a weird way, there's no hidden agenda. The simple agenda is, I want to be present to facilitate the end of this suffering for you. The other person believes that, trusts, and begins to open. It can be often very helpful to write a letter, a couple letters, many iterations of the letter expressing to the person who wronged them. And generally the way that I do it is the person sends me the letter and I look at it and we review it and I provide some feedback. And what we're trying to do is, through iterations, reach a place where the letter is clear and is not filled with anger. Because the anger is a phase that we want to reduce that. And there may be, in some cases, I do recommend once we get down to a certain iteration where the letter is relatively clear and it's speaking the truth. It could be saying, like, what you did caused me incredible anguish. I've been angry, infuriated for years, as opposed to, you mother F, and I want to rip out your frickin', that kind of stuff. Generally, I don't recommend expressing that because it doesn't help. It may help between me and the person if I'm facilitating, but going directly to the source, it typically doesn't help. Reaching a place where you can write a letter that is clear and speaks the truth and talks about what you've been through as a result, I'd say about half the time I do recommend sending that letter to the other person, because if we send the angry letter, we create more separation. If we send a letter that's true and has been sort of like, what's the word? Through consciousness, we have actually bringing a message that is true and is trying to resolve the relationship. I have seen that happen. In instances I've seen where a person's like, wow, like, you really nailed it and that's true, and like, yeah. And they own stuff. And it was beautiful. The relationship now morphed into something, adult to adult and positive. But we don't know if that's possible. And so that's one of the elements to this process that I meditate on and determine if I think we should actually provide this letter, the final iteration of the letter, to the person. But it can be very important if there's an openness to it, for the other person to hear your experience as an adult, having processed and reduced the anger, to understand to what degree their actions upon you cause you tremendous, years of anguish and suffering and lost opportunities and screwed up relationships, lack of finances, body issues, mind issues. I mean, they need to hear it so that they may reach a place of remorse, so that the whole human race can be moving forward. Okay, so after that phase, when the emotion has been mostly validated, released, then we have to start talking about the level of understanding. Because a lot of people will have an accusation, how did God let this happen? Or, this is such a heinous act that even though my emotion is released, I mean, I don't know what you want me to do. I can't have anything to do with this person. I mean, so we have to begin discussing, I'd say, 2 or 3 tracks. The one track is we're seeking some understanding of what led the person to do what they did. Going back to the beginning, I would say it's pretty rare that the person had a specific malicious intent. I mean, a malicious intent to me is probably the embodiment of somebody who has really succumbed to evil, who is saying, like, I want to create harm on another person. As opposed to, this is where, they have, I guess, various degrees of murder charges. You have murder 1, 2, manslaughter, involuntary. I don't know all of them. You may know it better than me as an attorney, but the law recognizes different levels of intention. And our goal is to try to understand what may have drawn the person to take the actions that they did. And a lot of times what we'll find is that the very seeds of what it was, the emotional unrest, the confusion, I said the sexual appetite that they could not manage, we then begin to reflect and see if we can relate to any of that within ourselves. To the degree that we can see that, yeah, I may not have crossed that line the way this person did, but I can feel some compassion as to, why they might have. And because the emotion and the anguish has been heard and received, I'm freer to begin to look at the person in this way, to begin to understand. Now that can be helpful, but we can still recognize there's a nugget inside that goes like, oh, there's still this mumbling kind of, that effing bastard screwed up my life or whatever. So there's often sort of a last piece to it. Now this is the part where I think it's a karmic understanding. There are certain mysteries that I don't know if anybody can give you a concrete answer. But if the fruits of one's labor leads to liberation, then I go, okay, that worked. So I'm going to say, this can work. It worked for me. It could potentially work for you. It may not. But I believe I've talked about this in some of our sessions here on Mondays, that I believe that everything follows the karmic law. And there can be karma there's karma for each individual. There may be a family karma. There may be a city karma, or a country karma, racial karma. And then ultimately there's the human race, which is, there is an attitude upon the earth is that if I'm wronged, I wrong the other person back. And that's not what Jesus taught. And so sort of as a human race, we are sold the idea that there are good people and bad people, and so the bad people have to be murdered or tortured or killed or whatever, or imprisoned and treated horribly, and the good people are, fine. And that idea perpetuates, the very thing that we're trying to overcome here. Because in the model of true forgiveness, we go, all humans are fallible. We all screw up, some to a much higher degree than others. And the whole idea of the mission of Christ was because of the recognition of the errors that people make. So God's going, we need a way for people to be unburdened. Because if people make errors and then they hurt other people, and those other people then harm the other person back, thinking, well, I'm now evening the score. And God's going like, that doesn't even any score. God is going, I'm the evener of scores. I will make sure that people receive the experiences that potentially awaken them to understand. But God brings it with an element of love. Now, it may be hard to see how, so you mean like a child is being molested and you're saying that's God's love? I mean, no. When you phrase it like that, of course not. But there's an understanding that somebody is subjected to experiences that may help them to understand that you cannot do that to somebody else because of how much anguish and how much suffering it causes. So you can reach a point where you realize that anything that you go through that is difficult has to adhere to these natural law principles. And one of them is not, I am a victim. There is no law of victimhood that I teach anyway. Now, if you're caught up in some sort of a racial karma, look at the Holocaust, right? Okay, so the whole Jewish culture in all of Europe, and maybe other parts of the world, was subjected to the anger of this one man who harnessed a regime to basically try to eliminate them from the earth. One looking back and going, okay, I have to examine the karma of the Jewish people and go, to what degree, because I am part of it, did I get pulled into that? The individual has to have a certain consciousness to be able to accept that we're responsible for this whole planet. That you are responsible for the universe that you create, and recognizing that the universe that you create affects the people that live and move and breathe in your universe. I see it that way. And so we may end up suffering as a result of the things that the people in our universe do. And I do think that that's fine. That's why I want the whole universe, the whole human race to awaken and begin to take responsibility for what we are doing and stop blaming these people and those people. Maybe it's a pipe dream, but whatever. As long as we're working towards it, what else can you do? So we have to shelve the idea that we were victimized. There is a phase where, of course, being treated as one was treated, like a 5-year-old kid is molested. Yes, they were a victim on that level, and we have to validate that until we reach that place and the emotion is released. And then we can begin to discuss the karmic perspective. It's like, can I relate to what happened? To understand, okay, this person was driven to do these things to me, or this, I was treated in this way. Another great example, and you find this in a lot of relationships, is one person is proclaiming their love, and we're going to be together forever, and secretly they're having an affair behind the person's back. And this one person wakes up one day like, oh my God, what a fool. Like, I bought your whole story, and I was ready to make a life with you, and all this time you've been cheating on me. Or, I've heard some incredible stories of just people are in love and they're planning to get married, and then, 2 days later the person disappears and they don't hear from the person for a month. And it screws them up so badly. They feel so embarrassed, humiliated, ashamed. What did I do, and what's wrong with me? And how do we get to a place where we can begin to understand, likely what happened is that the person freaked out, and this was their best choice in terms of how they decided to handle it. It's incredibly immature. It's totally insensitive. It's mean. It's humiliating. And yet, the person did not have the development or the courage to sit there and go like, you know what, on one level I'm in love with you, another level I can't stand you, on a third level I just got to get the hell out of this thing. We're not really trained to deal with those kind of situations. So what do people do? They avoid the confrontation of it. Maybe they don't even know what they're feeling. They're just like, I cannot do what I said I could do. And then for years the other person is like, well, I can't believe they said they lied to me. And yeah, it's such a betrayal against the dignity of a human soul that we cannot fathom it. That's really intense, and that's the underneath of it, the core of that is that I bought into it. I believed that you loved me. I wanted you to love me, and you frickin' totally robbed me of that. And that is it's just really heartbreaking to watch that. And yet, probably we've all done some version of it, from very minor to less minor. I don't want to make any accusations against people, but when you really do a thorough retrospection of your life, you'll probably recognize to what degree you have hurt other people, and maybe we're not aware to what degree it really hurt them. One just quick incident, which I may edit out, was when I was in university. First year, second year, of course, we're all away from home, and so there's a lot of, we didn't call it hookups back then, but it's like men and women are just like free all of a sudden. They have their own apartments and they're drinking, and it's a lot of energies floating around. And I was never a promiscuous person, but I was sort of caught up in it. And I remember one time, I ended up sort of connecting with this woman, and we ended up sort of like wandering into some school building. We were at the pub on campus, and we wandered into this school building. There's classes, but it was all shut down. And we just kind of laid on the floor embracing each other like we had been boyfriend and girlfriend for months. We were just talking and making out. And it was all very there was nothing, it wasn't really sexual. It was kind of like a beautiful thing. And for whatever reason, when I woke up the next day, we separated and went home, and I don't remember that much but I didn't feel a strong draw to pursue any kind of connection with this woman for whatever reason. She became really, really enamored with that. That really had a strong effect on her. The fact that we just laid together and were chatting and connecting and making out. That was. I remember I dropped out of school that year, went to travel in Europe, and then I moved to Vancouver. And this woman followed me to Vancouver. I didn't really even know her name. She figured out that I had moved to another city, and she followed me and was not stalking me, but I think something had got under her skin that was really intense. And in my years as a priest and stuff, I recognized how delicate people are. Just a few hours together lying there when we're 19 years old or something, I think it had a real painful effect on her, trying to figure out if there was a way for us to have something together. And I was at that age where I was like, I don't know why is this woman here, and I don't want anything to do with her. And it was just I don't know. That was where I was at in my consciousness, where I look back and go she uprooted her whole life with the hope that maybe whatever we had that night could become something. Man, we are really sensitive people in a good way. We really want love. So twisted up, your psyche gets so badly messed up. And that's what makes it really hard, is that the suffering is so extreme that we can't fathom the idea of forgiving, thinking that, we're letting the person off the hook, which we are not doing. We're surrendering them to God, and God's system will manage the relationship way better than you can, because God was going to try to exert love to wake the person up. We want to get to a point where we're okay with that. We go, God can handle this a lot better than I can. I no longer want to see this person. There's no part of me that wants to see him suffer or see her suffer as a result of what she did. I trust that God will manage the situation, either awaken the person so they feel some remorse, whether they ever apologize to me or take ownership of it, it's not my business. My forgiveness is not dependent upon whether or not that person ever comes back to me with any kind of remorse. I hand them over to God, and I turn to God in my own meditation, and I go, yes, I release, I forgive the person. In some instances, we recognize that I suppose it's possible in a prior incarnation that I violated people in a similar way. And so now, it may be in this lifetime you see it, or maybe you don't. It depends on your consciousness and your ability to understand, the energy of your actions. I hear countless times people's justification for things that I consider transgressions. What's a very simple one? Well, I'm going to find all these ways to get out of paying my taxes. It's like, well, it's kind of a gray area because this and that. To me, it's not a gray area. Like, I'm not saying I know exactly if this person is not being honest. There's all sorts of rules, and if you follow the rules, that's fine. But I know that people make justifications thinking that, well, that's what everybody's doing, or I can sort of say it's this, or, just say it's that, just say it's that. I really believe nothing is escaping God's perception. And so, if you know on some level you're getting away with something, then don't be surprised if something comes back to bite you later. Because I really believe God is trying to get us all to a place of love and acceptance, and we're going to slowly move the system to a place that it's based in fairness. What makes it hard about taxes? Well, we know that there are all these, they're spending billions of dollars on military. And the whole concept of military is just in the opposite direction of where humanity needs to go. It's like we're building and selling guns and killing machines to countries because we still think there's good and bad people. So we go, well, I'm not going to support that. So then I'm justified in not paying my taxes. Or this politician has totally been ripping us off. It's like, yeah, remember, God will take care of it all in time. Jesus said, give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. When you adhere to, the laws of the human institutions, you will find that you do not have surprises, really dramatic surprises that come around and throw you off. When I hear people explain all these bad things happening to them, and the energy is just, it's outraged. And I have a hard time validating it. I try to validate it, but I'm also like, on some level, let's examine how we are conducting ourselves and to what degree we may be putting out energies that are coming back to try to show us stuff. When we can get to the place where we can understand why we may be enduring, or why we have endured certain painful situations, then I think we can really get to this place of neutrality, because we trust that even if I don't know the exact circumstances that led to me going through that situation. I think I shared with you guys, when I was able to meditate, because my teachers felt I was at the right point in the process to go, examine if there's any part of you that, can be tempted to take advantage of somebody if there's an opportunity. And I was like, yeah, I know that part is in me. Luckily, I had not acted upon it. I had seen situations over my life where that could have been a possibility, and something inside just didn't allow me to, I think because of what I'd been through. Even that situation where I saw a little bit of affection to this woman, it kind of it dampened her for years. It's just something got in there that she could not shake, that she was willing to move all the way across the country and in the hopes that something may happen. And when I think about our relationship to our parents and what what we believe they should provide, and then if they cross that line, and then they deny it, and it's all covert, and I mean, it just screws you up really bad. So you reach a place when you can understand that mistreating people has a really serious repercussion. Then the lesson can finally be learned, and your karma will be cleared. And that's sort of the shift in consciousness that allows us to get to a point of going, like, yeah, we're all making mistakes, some to a higher degree than others. And my goal is to reach a place of where I can surrender that person over to God. And all my emotion has been witnessed, and I recognize it, and I accept. And I go, yeah, like, I truly release the person. And you'll know that you're free then. You'll be able to sit in the room, and you may see that person as somebody who's, twisted or convoluted because they have not yet owned their thing, or they can't see it, or they still justify it. But it's a place of, there's this great picture of Jesus where he's looking at somebody, and the compassion in his eyes is so intense. It's a painting, but you just see in him that understanding of, like, the human condition. I mean, it's, God, how much we want love, and how much we fabricate stories to try to make it happen. And then when somebody violates that, it's so devastating. And you never want to cross that line with somebody. You never want to abuse that power. And then, I think the whole society begins to move in the direction where deep love and care is really at the forefront of all interactions.
I got a question. The last part you were saying. So what if you are doing the right thing? You are a follower of Christ, and you're doing the right thing. You have good intentions. You don't take advantage of people, but you find that you keep getting taken advantage of because you're extending that.
Yeah.
And it really is the other person's problem.
Yeah.
And you can separate that, but you kind of, once you leave that situation, you go, okay, can't control what other people do or how they think.
Yeah.
But you keep, you're not doing anything, and I keep finding that it can't be law of attraction because I'm putting out good.
No.
So is that just my contract of the path? I said, okay, I want to learn all these lessons, give them to me as I'm going through. You see the difference?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Well, that's where you look to Jesus and go, okay, he brought the great message of love and light, and what did they do? They murdered him, right?
Exactly.
They killed him. So when there is kind of a...
I mean, that hasn't happened yet, so that's good.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Right, I know. Well, okay, I appreciate your sense of humor, and I know exactly what you mean. When you become a soldier of light, working on behalf of good, you will typically draw a certain amount of animosity towards you. I mean, I experienced that. And so we were forced to continually forgive people. It may not be directly tied to, stuff from the past. It's kind of like, now I work on behalf. I'm on Jesus' side. And that light will be an irritant to certain people.
So it's not really a law of attraction, it's more of a law of irritant?
Well, I'm not sure I would call it a law of irritant. I'm not sure which law it would follow under, because
that's what I've been trying to figure out. I'm like, how am I? Because I want to continue in the light, obviously.
Yeah.
But, there's got to be a point where I kind of can feel a little bit more protected.
Well, it may be that you need to learn certain boundaries in certain relationships. I don't know. I don't know you that well. I mean, I do find, as somebody who is trying to bring Christ's mission in a group like this, I feel awesome. I mean, but when we're out there in the world, the light accentuates that which is off, and people, a lot of times, they will act out against it. So one accepts that. If you're going to work on behalf of the mission of goodness, I think one has to accept that. I still think good boundaries are important. I think for every person that does attack you or slander you or whatever, want to harm you or abuse you, that we're given the opportunity to forgive them and not choose, and that can be very difficult. I experienced that, the challenge of that, having to take that into my meditation and go, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. But I wouldn't want you to come away from this thinking that, that's necessarily a law of attraction thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, that was a good explanation. It irritates. That's a good way to put it.
So one thing I do when I find that I'm in that situation, if I'm going to have to speak to the person about something that we're having conflict over, is before going into that conversation to ask Jesus for his words, not mine, and to put the right words that will bring understanding.
Yeah. That's good.
Trying
You
to
always
stay
want to go
calm.
to it with love,
Yeah.
obviously, but it's more so. You try. People come in and are more not malicious. I wouldn't say malicious, but they're not very honest.
right.
And find better to not say certain things. And you want. I'm like, well, I'm a good person. I say I'm honest, so you expect other people to be that way.
Yeah.
That's not always true.
It's rarely true, as it turns out, right?
Yeah, and I'm
Sometimes
learning as
so.
I get older. I really have to. My daughter's like, Mom, you really need to understand that most people aren't like you, and they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
People are very uncomfortable, it seems, with speaking a truth that they think is going to
Yeah.
cause pain for the other person.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that, I know we were talking about this, I can't remember recently, but maybe it was yesterday. You know, give the soul more credit. Just speak the truth and let the person deal with it. I mean, don't be mean about it. Try to have some tact, some timing,
Compassion.
kindness and compassion. But, I mean, I think I've shared with you guys when it comes to trying to rent this house. I mean, nobody wants to tell me the truth about it. We're texting and it's all going great, and then all of a sudden, what happened? And then they won't respond. It's like, just say you don't want to see it or you're not interested. It's not going to, my whole life's not going to fall apart because you don't want to live in the house that I bought.
It's much easier when all cards are on the table, I think.
I do too.
But I'm finding not everybody feels that way.
Right.
Well, here, that's the same situation as the person who disappeared that you were going to marry.
Yeah.
They don't know how to, as an adult, tell you why it won't
I know.
work. So they just disappear. You know?